Hello you lot, Miller Corner here, and unless you watch my channel for the bike content, in which case if you do, thank you very much, there's another video coming on that very soon, this video will almost definitely be of interest to you. What we've got here is a Fiat family Feud. On your left, the Seicento, the small city car from the 1990s evolved from the boxy Cinquecento, and on your right, the 169 Fiat Panda, technically the Mark III generation, which took over from the Seicento and lasted right the way up to 2012. Now, one succeeded the other, both are small, both are fun, both are Italian, which means of course I love both of them. But which is best? Well, we're fortunate enough to have both in our family stable right now, so in a video that frankly shouldn't have taken me this long to film, let's have a little Fiat head to head. Right, so I think we're going to start with a quick walk around of our pair of Fiat Nuggets, and we'll start with Old Faithful, the older one of the two, the Seicento. Now, this was launched in 1998 as a successor to the boxy fabulous Cinquecento, and originally was designed by Giugiaro, but Fiat rejected Giugiaro's design for it, and that went on to be used as the basis for the Daewoo Matiz, a car which I have driven, I have tested on the channel before with the one from Ian Seabrook's Hubnut channel. There's a link popping out, go and click it. Matiz is an awesome little car, but this is more awesome. This is Fiat's in-house design, and I have to say, I think the Seicento is a really good looking little car. You take the boxy Cinquecento, which is fairly obviously an 80s design, and evolved it into a late 90s shape, which made it look far more modern, but just as cool and cute at the same time. Anywhere where there would have been a square edge on a Cinquecento, the Seicento rounds it off. We've got rounded edges here, rounded edges here. Even the windows are more curvaceous than they were on the Cinquecento, right down to this window here being kicked up. It looks a lot funkier than your typical Corsa or Fiesta of this era. Now, this car is a Seicento Sporting Abarth, and that means you get a few little extras. You get the side skirts, you get these 14-inch wheels, you get the spoiler. This particular car has got the optional Salil rollback sunroof, but even so, even ignoring all these extras, this is a well-proportioned and rather handsome little car. And inside, in this sporting interior, you've got a lot of nice bits. You've also got some L plates in here. They aren't standard fitment. My brother is still learning to drive in this car, and some really nice sporty little touches in this sporting model. For instance, this kind of vinyl material that looks a bit like carbon fibre, I guess, and this nice chunky little gear knob, chunky little steering wheel. This is a really nice place to sit, and you sit in a sporting, at least, in these semi-sport seats. These are a comfortable car to sit in. I've travelled hundreds of miles in Seicentos and never had any complaints for comfort. You're not going to have quite so much comfort in the back, because whilst you do technically have a pair of back seats with headrests, I might add, yeah, you ain't getting anyone with legs back here. But I have had 4 adults in the Seicento, and whilst it wasn't comfortable, it was possible, which for some small cars of this era, you wouldn't be saying that for. Now, the boot in this car is full of crap at the moment, but yeah, this is not a particularly big boot. You can technically squeeze a fairly sizable shop in here, but you do have to be quite skilled at Tetris to even think about it. Of course, we've all heard the jokes about Fiat quality, and when you touch some of the plastics and switches in a Seicento, you can think that the quality is still at the same level, because it certainly doesn't feel the highest quality. But it's worth bearing in mind, I've got fairly extensive experience of these cars. I've owned 2 now, both of which with well over 100,000 miles on them, but they are hardy, they do last, they are reliable. By this point, Fiat were building cars of decent quality, so get it out of your head that they make poor quality cars. Right, we know what it looks like on the outside, we know what it's like on the inside, which is to say quite small but well made and really rather sporty in this sporting version. Now let's find out what it's like to drive. Focus. Right then, on the road in the Seicento, a situation that I'm very familiar with, having owned one of these cars, albeit not this one, for 4 or 5 years now. The Seicento for me is exactly what a small car should be. It's lightweight, it's compact, it's got just enough power that you can make it move if you need to, but not so much that you can't have fun at tiny speeds. You can get the Seicento with an 899cc engine, or the one that we've got in this car, the 1108cc 4-cylinder, single-point injected up to the 2000 facelift, then multi-point injected for extra high-techness, and in both cases producing 54 horsepower. Despite the fact this car does only weigh 3/4 of a tonne, you're still not going to be talking about 0 to 60 in much under 14 seconds. Top speed is around 92, allegedly. I haven't tested that. But the numbers tell only half the story, as many small car enthusiasts will tell you. Because the Seicento is so tiny and it is really small, it's on the level of an original Mini, it's so light and it's so much fun to chuck around. That little 1108cc engine might not be the most powerful lump in the world, but it still loves to rev in that little Italian engine way, and these are so durable. I've got an example of this engine with over 128,000 miles on it. I give it a hell of a hard time. I redline it constantly, I beat on it, and it's never overheated, it's never blown anything, it's always started, it's always been reliable. Pedal box is tiny. If you've got big feet like me, I've got size 11 feet, you might struggle if you want to spread out on a long journey, but frankly, if you're on a long journey in a little car like this, you've come out in the wrong car. The flip side to that tight pedal box is when you're driving it, it's so easy to heel and toe. I heel and toe pretty much on every down change in a Seicento because it's so easy to do. The steering, even in a non-sporting model, is so sharp and so direct. It is electric power assisted, which you won't get in the earlier Cinquecento. It might not be hydraulic purity like the enthusiasts like, but it still gives you plenty of idea of what the front end's doing. It's nicely weighted, it's really direct, and because it's power assisted, you can turn the car around in small spaces and at low speeds with no struggle. But then if you're on a little twisty road, drop it down a gear and drive like an Italian. Oh, $5.5 grand, it's such an eager little engine this. And as soon as you start driving it aggressively and eagerly, it responds. The steering weight is spot on, it's revvy, turns in so sharply. Any downsides? Well, apart from the obvious and aforementioned space issues that you're going to get with a car this small, it's never going to be a limousine, and the fact that it's perhaps not the safest car in the world. It does have an airbag, but this is still not a safe car. What it is a great fun car, and whenever the mood takes you, chuck it down a gear, stick it on the rev limiter. This is such a fun little car. Heel and toes so easily, and it will put a smile on your face, exactly like a small Fiat should. Right then, let's get back home and compare it to the Panda. Yep, in 2003 we got a successor to the Seicento. This is the technically Mark III, codename 169 generation Fiat Panda. Now, over its lifetime, we got multiple variations. We got the hot 100 HP version, we got the 4x4 version, which I particularly like, but this is just the regular Panda that you'll see down your local supermarket. This particular car has got a 1.2 litre 8-valve variant of the 1.1 litre fire engine that we just saw in the Seicento, in this case with 69 horsepower. Now, this was designed by Bertone, and it's designed to look a bit like a baby version of the second gen Multipla, and you can see that in a lot of the ways that the Panda is designed. You've got these big headlights, you've got these tall, pretty much vertical windows, these big door mirrors, these extra windows around here, and the Panda has got a really nice charm to the way it looks. It's kind of basic and utilitarian, and there's something really nice about that. These massive taillights, this big flat rear window. It's worth noting that this generation of Panda was replaced in 2012. It came out in 2003 and lived for 9 years, and even when it was killed off, it still didn't really look dated then, and that is one of the joys of basic minimalist design, is it doesn't really date. That utilitarianism extends to the function as well as the design. For example, the boot. Pop it, and that is a really surprisingly large boot for a car so small. You genuinely will get your weekly shopping there. You'll also notice the rear doors. They only did a 5-door Panda, much like they only did a 3-door Seicento, and that means that in the Panda you can actually get human beings in the back seat. Pop the door open, climb into this back seat, and even with the driving seat in my position, and I'm 6'1", so that is quite far back, you've got some knee room, you've got some decent headroom. You genuinely can get 4 people into this car, but your rear seat passengers will have to argue over who gets the cup holder. You're not exactly covered with luxurious materials on the door card, but it's perfectly functional. Your electric window switches are in the middle because that's a manufacturing thing. If you don't have to put window switches 2 on one door, 1 on the other, you haven't got to make 2 different door cards. You can just put the window switches in the middle here, and job is a good un. Apart from that, there's not a huge amount more you get in the way of features over the Seicento, really. Your dials are a little bit more involved. You've got a temperature gauge, luxury, and a few more warning lights. You've got a slightly more advanced trip computer, although don't go expecting to do full engine diagnosis on it, and a couple extra buttons. You have got more buttons for adjusting the clock, which is frankly a godsend. And this being a more modern car, you do get more airbags. For instance, you have got one for the passenger. Perhaps the biggest luxury you get in here, though, is a glove box. That's right, you've actually got a thing that folds up that you can store stuff in. Luxury. So from the outside, it's functional and usable. From the inside, it's functional and usable. But what's it like to drive? So now here we are on the exact same road, but in my mum's Panda. And it's time to find out how it compares to the beloved Seicento. Immediately you can feel that this is a newer car. For a start, this has got brakes which will pretty much stop you on a dime with almost no brake effort. One thing you do notice with older cars behind newer ones is that brakes really have improved over the last decade and a half or so. The other thing to bear in mind is that the Panda, unlike the Seicento, has got a fly-by-wire throttle pedal, and that means there's no physical connection between the pedal and the throttle body. It's all done via computers and sensors. And that means that whilst you do get supposedly more immediate throttle response and smoother, more efficient, stuff like that, you do lose that nice cable throttle pedal feeling of it tightening up the further than you press it. I'm a massive fan of cable throttles over fly-by-wire ones, so it's worth bearing in mind. But then again, if you're buying a 1.2 litre city car for maximum driving feel and involvement, then frankly, you might have ideas above your station. In every other respect though, the Panda lives up to that small Fiat philosophy. For a start, there's the steering. It is very light, much lighter than the Seicento steering, but it's still just as direct, and it is pretty nicely weighted when you actually tip it into a tightening corner. As I'm stuck behind this other Mark III Panda here, which brings me on to another aspect, is how successful this car was. The Mark III Panda sold in its millions because it was cheap and it was functional, but in that Italian car way, it was still fun to drive. It does feel more like an MPV, more like that Mark II multiplier that the design is meant to ape. You're very high up, you have got a decent amount of headroom, but you've got a tall, commanding, almost SUV-like driving position. The gear change is just here on this high-rise centre column. You've got a big steering wheel with these big dials and these big mirrors. This feels like a big car, even though it's only a couple of inches bigger than the Seicento. And it does roll a fair amount more than the Seicento if you start chucking it around. Yeah, still likes a rev or two. The fire engine is a cracking little unit, and this one is in its prime. It is healthy. The thing is though, the Panda altogether is more grown up. There's an Austin Maestro. Class. The Panda feels like a bigger car than it is, and that's a good thing. That's a good bit of small car design. A good small car should be small but feel big, because there's nothing worse than feeling hemmed in your small car, because it makes you feel vulnerable on the road. If we're being picky, the Panda isn't quite as good of a driver's car as the Seicento. The steering's not as feelsome. That fly-by-wire throttle is yeah, like pushing the trigger on a PlayStation controller, and there is a bit more body roll through the corners. But this is the more practical proposition. You couldn't fit the amount of people and luggage with as much space to spare in a Seicento as you can in the Panda. You wouldn't have as much space between you and your passengers. And for as much as it is probably 50% more practical, I'd say it's only 10 or 15% less fun. It's a cracking little car, this. Small wonder, in fact, that it won European Car of the Year in 2003. Still awesome. Well, that is about the best way you can spend an afternoon as far as I'm concerned. Two mad small Fiats. I love both of them, but which one can win this Fiat family feud? And for me, it really is a tough one. I'm not biased towards the Seicento. Yes, I love them. Yes, it was my first car. Yes, my Seicento is my forever car and all the rest of it, but the Panda is a cracking little car as well, and frankly any small Fiat gets my seal of approval. It is really a head and heart thing. The Seicento is the more fun car. Because it's older, it is more feelsome, you've got more feel through the steering, through the throttle pedal, and it is more fun to chuck down a B road. But the Panda is safer, it is more well equipped, it is more practical, and it looks more modern. This is the car you would rather be daily driving, and if I'm honest, it's probably the one that is more usable on a day-to-day basis. The fact of the matter is though, that both these cars are winners. Both are available from about 500 quid. Both put a massive smile on your face, both cost buttons to run, and both mark you out as not owning a Polo, Fiesta or Corsa. And for me, that means there are no losers here. Let me know in the comments below which one of these cars you choose, but for me, I don't have to choose because we've got both. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. Catch you soon and have a good one.